The iPhone 14 Pro Max isn't just the most powerful phone around. It's a joy to use thanks to the clever new dynamic island for displaying notification and live activities. Apple's largest Pro model also delivers fantastic cameras including a new 48 megapixel main shooter and always on display compelling action mode for video and obscene battery life. It's pricey, but it's also the best phone money you can buy. The iPhone 14 Pro Max has the upgrades I was waiting for, and one I didn't know I needed. Yeah, the always on display is well overdue, but the biggest upgrade is actually Dynamic Island, delivering alerts and live activities like cue music, turn-by-turn directions, timers, and Face ID animations. It's clever, and I admit it's just fun to use. I also got a kick out of using the camera's new action mode for capturing video. Other smartphones have a similar feature, but the combination of the iPhone 14 Pro Max's video quality and its super steady footage feels a bit like magic. Also magical is the ease with which you can switch between multiple phone numbers using this flagship's eSIM functionality, though some will lament the utter lack of a physical SIM card tray. Once again, Apple has made the fastest phone around with its A16 Bionic chip, but it's not really about benchmarks. Instead, it's about what this chip enables. From the always-on display to the powerful 48 megapixel camera, what it can do. Add in extra long battery life and you have the best iPhone you can buy as well as the best phone you can buy, period. If you want a smaller phone, check out our iPhone 14 Pro review. The iPhone 14 Pro Max has a release date of September 16. The starting price is $1,099, making it one of the most expensive flagship phones around. The starting storage remains 128GB, which frankly doesn't feel very pro. But you can upgrade to 256GB for $1,199. Going to 512GB costs $1,399 and 1TB will run you $1,599. When I picked up the iPhone 14 Pro Max for the review, I noticed two things immediately. The first is that the notch has been replaced by a P-shaped cutout, and the second is that the camera bump is even bigger. All three camera lenses on the back of the iPhone 14 Pro Max are larger, as is the flash, so this area takes up a lot of room. This is also a slightly heavier and thicker phone than its predecessor. The iPhone 14 Pro Max measures 6.33 by 3.05 by 0.31 inches and weighs 8.47 ounces compared to 6.33 by 3.07 by 0.3 inches and 8.46 ounces for the iPhone 13 Pro Max. There are 4 color options for the iPhone 14 Pro Max: deep purple, silver, gold, and space black. I am partial to the deep purple as it pops the most, and that's the one I tested out for this review. I continue to appreciate the matte glass back and color matched polished steel sides Apple uses for its Pro phones. The overall look is elegant if a bit too familiar, with the same IP68 water resistance. What's missing? That would be the SIM card tray. Like the headphone jack before it, Apple has removed this feature for US models, replacing it with eSIM technology. The good news is that we found it quite easy to add a line to the iPhone 14 Pro Max and you can have 2 active numbers at once. The bad news is that some overseas carriers don't yet support eSIM, so you will need to check if your provider is compatible before you travel overseas. Now this is innovative. Apple didn't just shrink the iPhone's notch and move it down, it found a way to make this area useful and even fun. In addition to housing the true depth camera, the dynamic island acts like a mini dashboard, providing access to the info you need no matter what app you are in. If you open up Apple Music or Spotify, for example, and then swipe back to the home screen, you will see the album art displayed on the left side and there's a mini waveform animation on the right. And if you press and hold on the dynamic island, a larger window will pop up showing the track progress and playback controls. Or you can press once just to launch into the app. There's a lot of other apps that take advantages of Dynamic Island. You can see the status of your timer there, the next direction to take in maps, the status of incoming and outgoing calls, and more. You can even have 2 live activities displayed side by side in the island. Apple is definitely playing catch up with Android phones when it comes to the iPhone 14 Pro's new always-on display, and yet Apple's implementation delivers a more robust experience if you are willing to take the time to set it up. Because the iPhone 14 Pro Max's display refresh rate can scale all the way down to 1 Hz, Apple designed its AOD to essentially mirror the lock screen but at a much lower brightness level, so you can still see your wallpaper lock screen widgets like weather, calendar, and activity ring and notifications coming through. The always-on display is smart enough to turn off if you put the iPhone 14 Pro Max in your pocket or upside down on a table. I personally appreciated having the always-on display for simply displaying the time without having to fully turn on the display, as my dogs usually see that as a sign they can go outside no matter the time to night. In a way, I preferred the simplicity of the Pixel 6 and Galaxy S22 Ultra with their always-on display showing just the basics like time, battery status, and notifications. But I like that there's more customizations option for the iPhone 14 Pro Max. Otherwise, the iPhone 14 Pro Max's Super Retina XDR display is amazingly bright and vivid. In fact, this panel is rated for up to 1600 nits of brightness with HDR content and 2000 nits outdoors in bright sunlight. This panel dazzled as I zoomed in on footage of a fountain, as I could make out the drops of water hitting the pool below and creating a fizzy bounce of bubbles. And I got lost in a tropical paradise when playing the Air Twister air shooting game with fluid animations to match the 120Hz ProMotion display. Check out the samples of iPhone 14 Pro Max versus other flagships. Apple has shaken things up with its camera on the iPhone 14 Pro Max, offering a 48 megapixel wide sensor for the first time. By default, the sensor will group every 4 pixels in a quad pixel and optimize for better light capture in 12 megapixel photos. But you can go 48 megapixel in Pro RAW mode if you want the most detail possible, which is ideal for cropping in. The 48 megapixel camera also enables a new 2x zoom option that joins the 12 megapixel 3x telephoto zoom lens, but you don't get the higher zoom offered by the Galaxy S22 Ultra's 10x dual optical setup. The iPhone 14 Pro Max also features a new 12 megapixel ultra-wide camera that's nearly twice the size, and 12 megapixel true depth camera now offers autofocus along with the faster f1.9 aperture for better low-light photos. In fact, better low-light performance is a big theme across the board with this phone, as there's photonic engine powered by the A16 Bionic chip that's designed to offer brighter and more colorful photos for every camera. You can shoot 48 megapixel photos, but you first have to enable Apple Pro RAW and set the Pro RAW resolution to 48 megapixel in Settings app. It would be easier to initially activate this within the camera app, but once enabled, you can toggle between RAW and normal pics in the camera app. The iPhone 14 Pro Max's A16 Bionic is Apple's first chip built using the 4nm process, and it's once again the fastest chip in a phone. The CPU is rated to be only 10% faster than the A15 Bionic, but it offers 50% more memory bandwidth, which aids gameplay. In my testing, I found the iPhone 14 Pro Max wonderfully responsive whether I was bouncing between lots of apps or playing games like Asphalt and Legends. Racing on the Himalayas track, I experienced fluid action even with several other cars on screen jostling for the first place. On Geekbench 5, which measures overall performance, the iPhone 14 Pro Max hits 1882 in single core and 5333 in multi-core. That's notably better than the iPhone 13 Pro Max, which is the 1722 in single core and 4549 in multi-core, and it blows away the Galaxy Z Fold 4 and its Snapdragon 8 Plus Gen 1 chip, 1328 on single core and 3831 on multi-core. The Galaxy S22 Ultra was even further behind, which is Snapdragon 8 Gen 1 processor, and its single core performance was 1249 and multi-core performance was 3392. Thanks in part to the iPhone 14 Pro Max's more efficient chip, the iPhone 14 Pro Max lasted a very long time on our battery test. We are talking an average of 14 hours and 42 minutes. This is good enough for the iPhone 14 Pro Max to vault near the top our best phone battery life list. The iPhone 14 Pro Max fared quite well in terms of endurance. After charging close to 90% and then using the phone from 1 PM to 6 PM for downloading apps, playing music and shooting photos and videos, the phone's battery only dropped to 60%. Apple hasn't publicly stated the iPhone 14 Pro. Unfortunately, the iPhone 14 Pro Max sticks with 20-watt charging, so there are faster charging phones out there. Charging a drained iPhone 14 Pro Max, we got only 42% in 30 minutes. Apple claims you can hit 50%, so we will be retesting it. By comparison, the Galaxy S22 Ultra got 24 hours of video streaming performance in 30 minutes with its 25-watt charger, and the OnePlus 10 Pro reached 93% and got to 55% in 15 minutes, benefiting from 65-watt charging.
The phone doesn't ship with
Later
a
this
power
fall,
adapter,
Apple will
just
launch
a
two key
USB-C
safety
to
features
lightning
for the
cable,
iPhone
but
14
if
Pro
you
Max.
buy
The
the
first
dedicated
is
50-watt
emergency
charger,
SOS satellite,
Apple
which
says you
combines
can
new
get
antennas and
to
software to
50%
connect to satellites.
in 30
You
minutes,
can't
and
get
we
a cellular
found
or Wi-Fi
the claim
signal.
to be
You will then
accurate.
get help from
That's the
emergency
same as
services
the
to your
iPhone 14
location.
Pro, though we still don't
The
have
second safety
fast
feature is
charging
crash
with the
detection,
iPhone
which
14
leverages the iPhone
The
14's
phone also
improved
supports
accelerometer
MagSafe
and
and
gyroscope
UI-based
to
charging.
detect whether you are in
An
a car
iPhone
crash.
is nothing without
Should a
its
crash
platform
happen,
and
your
iOS
iPhone
16,
can
which
automatically dial
with all the
emergency
iPhone
services
14
as well
models
as
is
notify
more
your
than
emergency
just
contacts
fingerprint.
you
It
designate.
changes some
The iPhone 14 Pro
fundamental
Max
aspects
runs
of the
iOS 16
iPhone.
by default,
Not
and there's a
only
lot to
you have
like
the
in
new
this new
and
software
impressive
update.
hardware
You can
features,
customize the
but
lock
the
screen
iPhone
with
14
widgets,
Pro will
photos
work
and more,
in
and
new,
what you choose will
unexpected
also
and
show
anything
up on your
pleasing
always on
ways.
display. Other highlights include the
One of the
ability to
biggest
unsend
changes in
texts
the new
and
launch
edit them,
in
a
addition to the
replacement
ability
for
to
passwords
have
called
multiple
passkeys,
customizable
and
lock
new
screens.
fitness app,
Each
and
one
finally
can
a
be
battery
linked to a
percentage
different focus
indicator.
setting. It features
Later
some
this year,
really
iCloud
cool
shared
image
photo library will
segmentation
make it
technology.
easier to share photos with
Other
family
updates
members.
include
And
a
live
search
activities are
button on
coming
the
from
home
developers,
screen,
which will
editable
make the
and
dynamic
retrievable
island on the
text
iPhone 14
messages,
Pro better by
email
showing
unsent,
things like
multi-stop
sports score
direction
and the
emails,
real-time progress of your
live
food order
text
or
capture
ride share.
from video
The iPhone 14
and
Pro
image
Max is the
segmentation
best big screen
that
phone
lets
around,
you
and
grab the
it
subject
justifies
from
the high price
virtually
by providing
any
a
photo
stellar
and drop
display
it
with
into
always
the
on
apps
capabilities,
like Notes
the
and
best
Notes.
cameras in a phone, and
There
extra
are
long
tons
battery
of
life.
changes to
The
explore
dynamic
and use,
island is
and
by
they
far my
undoubtedly
favorite
make the
feature
iPhone
because
14
it
Pro
saves your
experience
time
even better.
having to jump between
I am
multiple
confident in
apps
saying
just to
that
get
based on my
key bits
uses
of
and
info,
time with
and
the
it will
device,
get
the
even
iPhone
better
14 Pro
as
is the
developers
best
jump on
phone
board.
Apple's made.
If you like to shoot video,
With
you will
its
also enjoy the
incredible
new
cameras,
action mode
beautiful
for
display
smoother
and powerful
footage
performance, the
and
iPhone
even
14
sharper
Pro
cinematic mode.
outruns
The
any
always on
of the
display also
competition.
looks well,
It's
even
faster,
if you have to
smoother,
work
and
to
its
get
cameras
the
win
feature
out
the
against
way you
everything
want.
else, even the Pixel
There are
6
some
Pro.
things I don't like about the
The
iPhone 14
biggest
Pro Max,
downside
including
to
its
the iPhone
shape
14 Pro
and the
is the
fact
lack
that
of a
it
physical
doesn't
SIM
offer
tray
faster
in the
charging
US
that
models,
matches what
which
rival
might
phones
irritate
provide.
some people.
And while I personally
was
can
also
live
less
without
than
a SIM card
impressed
tray,
with the
international
device in
travelers
our
may be
battery life
frustrated not being able to
For
just pop in a new
$999
SIM
US
on the
you
land.
can't go
Some
wrong
carriers
with the
simply
iPhone
don't
14 Pro.
support eSIM
It's
functionality
less
yet.
worthwhile of
Overall
an
though, the
upgrade
iPhone
over
14
the
Pro
iPhone 13
Max
Pro,
is a
but anything
beast of
older
a phone
pales
that's
in
pro-level
comparison.
powerful while
Even the
also
iPhone
being a
12 Pro
joy to
trails
use.
the iPhone
It's
14
the
Pro,
best phone
given
you can
the
buy,
older
period.
phones lack